Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for being here. Now, growing up in the 80s, one of my favorite things to do was go to the arcade. And back then, there would be row upon row of arcade cabinets. Nowadays, it's a little bit different. It's more of an amusement park feel, kind of like a Chuck E. Cheese thing. And I'm not saying that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but I'm more of the old school arcade guy. But as it turns out, there seems to be a little bit of a movement going on nowadays with these barcades opening up and it being more of the old school arcades than maybe the new, and that's great. But it got me thinking, what are 5 games that I like to play back in the day? So sit back, relax, and let's take a look at 5 arcade games that were my favorites.
First on our list is Dig Dug, a 1982 maze arcade game developed and published by Namco. And basically you play a little guy in a white suit that has to dig down into the ground to find 2 different kinds of enemies. One that just happens to be a dragon who breathes fire. And in order to beat these enemies, you have to pump them up with an air pump that you have until they explode. The game increases in difficulty from level to level by adding more and more enemies until it's just too many for you to handle. Dig Dug is one of the classic arcade games from the 80s and one of my favorites. So next on our list is Popeye, a 1982 platformer. It's developed and released by Nintendo and is based off the comic and cartoon. So if you're my age and maybe a little bit older, you are probably familiar with the cartoon. Popeye came out on the NES, the Commodore 64, the ColecoVision, the Atari 2600, the Intellivision, and more. Just about every console that was out there got a port of this game. Here you play as Popeye with the objective of collecting a certain number of dropped items by your girlfriend Olive Oyl. These items include 24 hearts in the first level, 16 musical notes in the second, and 24 letters in the word help in the third. Popeye must play against his arch-rival Brutus, who is insanely jealous that Olive Oyl's love only goes to Popeye. Here, Brutus will try to stop you from collecting all the items she drops by touching you in any way possible, which kills you. The only way you can defeat Brutus is by eating a can of spinach or knocking a barrel onto his head in the first level. And while Popeye is definitely a hard game that goes along with pretty much every arcade game, it is definitely a fun one to play and something that took a lot of quarters in my youth. Anybody that's ever been to an arcade, especially in the 80s, is no stranger to the next game, and that's Burger Time. It came out in 1982 and was developed by Data East and distributed by Bally Midway. Here you play as Chef Peter Pepper, whose main objective is to make hamburgers by running through the ingredients, which drops them down to the next level. In order to win the level, you have to make all the ingredients get down to the lowest level and complete the hamburger. And the 3 bad guys that are there to stop you from making the hamburgers are Mr. Egg, Mr. Hot Dog, and Mr. Pickles. You score points by running through the ingredients and making the hamburgers, but you can also pick up extra points by either dropping the ingredients on the bad guys' heads or have them drop down while the bad guys are actually standing on the ingredients, which also makes the ingredients go down an extra level. To be honest with you guys, I don't really play this game all that often just because it's so hard for me to play it. I always have a hard time, so maybe 5-10 minutes at the most. The controls to me have always been a little wonky no matter which version I play, whether it's the arcade version or the Intellivision or the Nintendo. But one thing for sure is that any arcade that you walked into in the 80s was almost guaranteed to have this game in there, and that's Burger Time. This is Galaga, another one of my favorite games and a staple in any arcade out there. It was developed and published by Namco. It came out in 1981 as an arcade fixed shooter. It was pretty much ported to everything, and the goal of the game is to stop Galaga forces from destroying mankind. In Galaga, you take control of a lone space fighter in the attempt to shoot down all the Galaga forces, which look like insects. This game definitely takes liberties from Space Invaders, with improving on the concept as well. If you've ever been to an arcade in your life, I guarantee you that this cabinet was there. And if it wasn't there, then you must have been in Green Bay, because nothing good comes from Green Bay. And the final game on our list is my all-time favorite arcade game, and that's Peter Pack-Rat. It's a 1985 platformer and was developed and released by Atari Games. It also had releases on other systems such as the Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum. Here you play as Peter, whose mission is to collect items and bring it back to his nest. The game has 3 different levels: the junkyard, caves, and trees. And every time you finish a round of the 3, the next levels are a little bit harder. They're the same levels, just a little bit bigger and a little bit more difficult. You'll play against enemies such as owls, bats, dogs, spiders, and gangster rats. I absolutely love this game, and the only place that I ever remember seeing it was at the Showbiz Pizza here in town. Can I tell you how many tokens I spent on this game? It was such a fun game to play. And I think one of the biggest appeals at the time was the graphics. The graphics of this game were far beyond a lot of what the other arcade games were looking like at that point, because this was probably, you're talking the mid to early 80s here, and the graphics were far beyond anything else I had seen. The controls are a little bit wonky because you have to play with the joystick, and then it has a button on the joystick to jump, but once you got used to that, it wasn't that big of a deal. Unfortunately, I never hear a lot of people talking about Peter Pack-Rat, but I think that's just because there wasn't a lot of them out there. But I'll tell you, when I built my arcade cabinet recently, and I finally found a ROM of this game to work on it, I can't tell you how excited I was, and I always have this playing in the background just to hear that ambient noise coming from that game, because it just takes me back to my youth, big time. So if you plan on building an arcade cabinet or already have one, Peter Pack-Rat should definitely be on your list of games to play.
Well, there you go, guys. 5 games that I like to play in the arcade. Now, I know there are so many other great arcade games out there, and I'll probably do a follow-up video to this one just to do maybe like 5 more. And then, to be honest with you, I could probably do a bunch more videos because there's just so many good ones out there. But I just wanted to take care of the 5 that I always keep coming back to. Alright guys, well thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit that like button, and if you're not subscribed, dude, subscribe! Alright guys, I'll see you later. Until next time, bye-bye.